The thumbnail says, "My signature," not the equation. Let me prove that to you immediately. On August 6, 1945, a bomb destroyed the city of Hiroshima. By December of that year, 140,000 people were dead. The total energy released was equivalent to the complete conversion of less than 1 gram of matter, less than a paperclip. 46 kilograms of uranium were loaded into that weapon. Less than 1 gram of it actually converted to energy. The rest scattered uselessly. And I need you to hold that ratio in your head, because the physics of that sentence is not the story I came here to tell you. The story everyone tells is this: Einstein discovers that mass and energy are the same thing. Scientists realize that if you convert enough mass, the energy released would be catastrophic. Someone builds a bomb. Einstein is to blame. The equation is to blame. The logic is clean. It is wrong. The equation did not kill anyone. It described a relationship between mass and energy that has been true since the first second of this universe's existence. The sun has been converting mass to energy for 4.5 billion years without consulting me. The equation is not a blueprint. It is not an instruction. It is a fact about nature. No more responsible for the bomb than the laws of gravity are responsible for a man who falls from a cliff. The equation told physicists that enormous energy was hiding inside the nucleus of certain atoms. It did not tell them how to extract it, how to sustain a chain reaction, or how to construct a device that would not destroy itself before it destroyed anything else. Solving those problems took a decade, $2 billion, and 130,000 people working in wartime secrecy. I contributed none of it. I never set foot in Los Alamos. The Army excluded me on security grounds, which I found simultaneously insulting and, in retrospect, appropriate. The physics of the bomb was built by Enrico Fermi, J. Robert Oppenheimer, and hundreds of physicists and engineers who did not need my equation to do their work. The chain reaction was first demonstrated under a stadium in Chicago in December of 1942. I was in Princeton. I read about it later like a civilian. So if you came here expecting a confession about an equation, I must offer you something more uncomfortable. What I contributed was not physics. What I contributed was a signature on a 2-page letter. And that letter changed history, not because it contained scientific truth, but because it contained my name. Let me show you exactly how wrong the comfortable version of this story is, because there are 3 versions and all 3 are wrong, and I want to destroy them in order. Wrong answer 1. The equation is to blame. I have already addressed that. The equation is a description of nature. Nature is not to blame for what frightened nations do when they understand her better. Wrong answer 2. The scientists built it, not me. The engineers at Los Alamos made the decisions that mattered. I signed a letter, but the bomb was built by other people following other paths of physics. I am not responsible for what others chose to do. I understand the appeal of this version. It distributes blame so widely that no single point bears much weight, and everyone can feel their share is manageable. I reject it precisely because of what it ignores. In the summer of 1939, Leo Szilard came to find me. He was a Hungarian physicist, gifted and at that particular moment genuinely frightened. He had understood, before almost anyone in America, that uranium fission could sustain an explosive chain reaction. He had also understood that German physicists understood the same thing. Germany had halted the export of uranium ore from the Czech mines it had occupied. That decision was not administrative. That was a government beginning to think seriously about nuclear weapons. Szilard did not come to me for physics. He came to me for a name, my name. He needed someone whose letter to the President of the United States would be taken seriously on impact, without preamble, without needing to establish credibility, purely on the force of the signature at the bottom. He had drafted the letter, and he wanted me to sign it. Think carefully about what that means. He did not want my expertise. He did not need my calculations. He wanted me to function as a key that would open a door no amount of scientific argument would otherwise have unlocked. You might say, the Americans would have gotten there regardless. They had Fermi, they had resources, they had their own physicists who understood fission. Why would one letter change anything? I used to tell myself that version. I no longer find it credible. In August of 1939, the United States had no nuclear weapons program whatsoever. The idea that a bomb could be built from uranium was theoretical, expensive, and borderline implausible to most people in government. Convincing Roosevelt to commit serious federal money required not just the argument, but the arguer. Szilard was unknown to him. Fermi had been born in Italy and was not yet fully trusted. They needed a name that would make the theoretically impossible sound urgently real, and there was exactly one name in the world that could do that in the summer of 1939. The letter reached Roosevelt in October of that year. He read it. He formed a committee. The committee eventually became the Manhattan Project, and the Manhattan Project produced the device that killed 140,000 people in Hiroshima alone. Now the third wrong answer, which is the most seductive of all, it goes, even if your letter mattered, the physics itself was already there. Germany was working on it. The Soviet Union would eventually have developed it. The weapon was coming regardless of what you signed. You were not the cause. You were the current in a river that was already flowing to the sea. This is philosophically elegant and historically dishonest. The Manhattan Project succeeded in August of 1945. Germany surrendered in May of that same year. The original justification for my letter to Roosevelt was the fear that Nazi Germany would develop nuclear weapons before the Allies did. By the time the bomb was ready, that threat had ended. Germany's nuclear program had never come close to a working weapon. Their physicists were years behind, the industrial resources had never been committed at scale, and the question of who would win the war in Europe had been settled without any nuclear device. Which means the weapon built with my letter's assistance was used not against the threat that justified its creation, but against Japan, a country with no nuclear capability whatsoever. The argument that history would have arrived at this destination regardless is an argument about an unspecified future that did not happen. What actually happened in the specific summer of 1945, at a specific point in a specific war, involved decisions made on specific timelines that my signature helped accelerate. Whether some version of this would eventually have occurred is not the same question as whether it occurred when it did and how it did. Timing is not incidental to 140,000 deaths. Timing is the whole question. Let me also tell you what the physics of that period actually felt like from the inside. When Lise Meitner and Otto Frisch explained fission theoretically in January of 1939, they did so in exile, having been driven from Germany by Nazi racial laws. The knowledge that eventually made the bomb possible was produced partly by scientists fleeing the regime the bomb was originally meant to counter. The fear that animated my letter was rational. Germany was real. The uranium controls were real. The physicists who had remained in Germany were real. But rational fear, sustained past its original cause, shapes machinery that does not stop when the fear is resolved. Let me tell you what the physics of the bomb actually is. Not as a lesson, as evidence for a verdict. Inside the nucleus of a uranium atom, protons and neutrons are bound together by what physicists call the strong nuclear force. That force is powerful enough to overcome the electromagnetic repulsion between protons, which means it is storing enormous energy in a very small space. In the heaviest atoms, that binding is slightly weaker relative to the total energy involved. Add one additional neutron to uranium-235 and the nucleus becomes unstable. It splits. In splitting, it releases energy, and it releases more neutrons. Those neutrons strike other nuclei. Those nuclei split in turn. One event becomes many. Many become a cascade that, in a sufficiently dense arrangement of fissile material, cannot stop itself. The energy released in a single fission event is roughly 50 million times greater than the energy released in a comparably sized chemical explosion. 50 million times. That ratio is why the conversion of less than 1 gram of matter releases as much force as 20,000 tons of conventional explosive. Now stop with that number for a moment. 20,000 tons. Then understand that the city of Hiroshima on the morning of August 6, 1945, was a city of ordinary people on an ordinary morning. There was an air raid alert that morning, but it was issued for a small formation of aircraft and was not treated as a full emergency. At 8:15 local time, the weapon detonated 600 meters above the city center. The fireball reached temperatures of several million degrees. Within a radius of 1 mile, almost everything that was not stone ceased to exist. Some people caught in the open left only shadows, burned into the stone steps and concrete walls behind them, where their bodies had briefly blocked the thermal radiation. You have perhaps seen those photographs. I want you to understand what they are. Those shadows mark the precise boundary where a human body absorbed energy and became, for a fraction of a second, a shield against something moving at the speed of light. The carbon in those bodies had been assembled from air and water and food over the course of years. It had been organized by genetics and chemistry into people who had names and plans for that Tuesday morning. The energy that ended all of that came from the conversion of less than 1 gram of uranium. That is the ratio between what I described mathematically and what was done with the description. By December of 1945, the estimates for Hiroshima dead ranged from 110,000 to over 200,000. That range, a span of 100,000 human lives in our uncertainty, is itself a statement about the scale of what happened. We cannot agree within 100,000 on the count of the dead, and we call that precision. Most people believe the story ends there. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, surrender, peace. The lesson was learned. The catastrophe became the final catastrophe. I want to tell you that this is the most dangerous assumption in the version of history most people have been taught. The bomb that destroyed Hiroshima was already obsolete within 8 years. The thermonuclear weapon, the hydrogen bomb, tested by the United States in November of 1952, worked not by splitting atoms, but by fusing them, imitating the process that powers the sun, using a fission bomb merely as its trigger. Its yield was 10 megatons, 500 times more powerful than what destroyed Hiroshima. Not 500 cities. One detonation, 500 times the force. The Soviet Union tested its own version within 10 months. Then both nations began building more. As if one city-destroying weapon multiplied by 1,000 became something other than 1,000 city-destroying weapons. At the peak of the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union together possessed more than 60,000 nuclear warheads. 60,000. Both governments adopted a doctrine called mutual assured destruction, which is the formal acknowledgement that if either side launches a first strike, the other retains enough weapons to destroy civilization in response. The word chosen to describe this arrangement was stability. I find that word choice remarkable. A system in which civilization survives only if no leader, no general, no technician, and no computer makes a catastrophic error is not stable. It is a performance of stability that depends on perfect judgment by imperfect creatures under maximum pressure. Here is something that happened and almost did not. In November of 1983, NATO conducted a military exercise called Able Archer 83. It simulated a nuclear escalation scenario in realistic enough detail that Soviet military intelligence concluded it might be preparation for an actual first strike. Soviet nuclear forces were placed on alert. Aircraft carrying nuclear weapons were readied at bases across the Warsaw Pact. For several days, based on misread signal traffic and genuine fear inside the Soviet command structure, the two most heavily armed powers in history came closer to nuclear exchange than at almost any point since Cuba in 1962. We did not know this was happening. No public announcement was made. People watched television and read newspapers, while the systems built to protect them briefly ran on their own logic, without the full knowledge or control of any single human being. We were saved by a combination of internal Soviet caution, corrective intelligence reports, and, if we are being honest, luck. Not wisdom, luck. And the systems that produced that near miss still exist, in modified form, still governed by doctrines written when both nations' governments believed the other would launch without warning. Most people have never heard of Able Archer 83. That is not a coincidence. that is a symptom. In April of 1955, Bertrand Russell sent me a draft of what became known as the Russell-Einstein Manifesto. I signed it on April 11th. I died on April 18th. The document was addressed to every government and to the public. Its central argument was this: in any future war involving nuclear weapons, the survival of human civilization could not be guaranteed, and therefore governments must commit to resolving their conflicts by peaceful means, not as a preference, as a mathematical requirement, because the alternative was extinction. The line people remember is, "Remember your humanity and forget the rest." It has been quoted often enough that it sounds like a sentiment, the kind of phrase that belongs on a wall or a graduation card. I did not mean it that way. I meant it as the most precisely useful instruction I knew how to give. It means, before you reach for the language of national interest, strategic deterrence, or necessary sacrifice, you must ask whether that language allows for the species to continue. If it does not, then whatever you are constructing is not policy. It is an argument for extinction wearing the clothes of governance. I did not sign the manifesto from a position of clean hands. I signed the letter to Roosevelt, and I knew what I was signing. The threat from Nazi Germany was not a fantasy. The physicists who had remained in Germany, the uranium controls, the known capabilities of German science, these were real. I made the calculation that a fascist state with nuclear weapons and no institutional checks would be more catastrophic than a democratic state with the same weapons under civilian oversight. In 1939, that calculation felt defensible. It still does not feel entirely indefensible to me now. What I failed to fully anticipate was the persistence of what I helped begin. The emergency ended. The machinery did not end. The weapons built to prevent a Nazi bomb were used against Japan. The weapons built during the Cold War to deter the Soviet Union still exist. The doctrines have not been fundamentally reconsidered since the 1950s. I could not have known this in 1939, but I can say without qualification that the signature was mine, and the responsibility that follows from it is also mine, and I have chosen to carry that rather than distribute it comfortably across governments and generals and the physics itself. Here is the question I want to leave with you, and it is not a historical question. It is a question about right now. The gap between what I discovered and what was done with it is not unique to 1945. It is the permanent condition of knowledge in a civilization where discovery moves faster than the wisdom to govern it. You are developing systems of artificial intelligence whose long-term behavior cannot be confidently predicted by the people who built them. You are editing the genomes of living organisms with tools whose off-target effects are still being mapped. You are constructing global communication systems that can be used to coordinate deception at scales that were physically impossible a generation ago. The people building these things are not villains. Most of them are curious. Some of them are brilliant. Many of them are working on something they find beautiful. And I understand that impulse precisely, because I spent my life chasing exactly that kind of beauty. But beauty is not a moral warning. It is a distraction. The elegance of a correct equation tells you nothing about what a frightened government will do with it. What I did not understand in 1905, sitting at a desk thinking about the nature of light, was that understanding something true about the world means inheriting a question about what that truth becomes in the hands of imperfect, frightened, ambitious people. That question does not wait for you to finish the interesting part. It arrives the moment the knowledge is real, and it cannot be assigned to governments or ethicists or the generation that comes after you. It belongs to the person who did the work. The carbon in your body was cycling through the atmosphere a few years ago. The iron in your blood was forged in a dying star before this solar system existed. You are a temporary pattern of matter that has, for a brief period, become capable of understanding its own structure. That is genuinely extraordinary. It is also a description of exactly the kind of creature that signed a letter in 1939 without fully accounting for what would still be running 60 years later. Less than 1 gram destroyed a city. A signature helped make it possible. I spent the remaining years of my life asking whether I should have refused, and I never arrived at a clean answer. I do not think clean answers exist for questions of that weight. But here is what I believe. with the same precision I would give to any physical claim. The responsibility of knowledge cannot be separated from the knowledge itself. Anyone who tells you otherwise is choosing comfort over honesty, and I have never had much patience for that trade. What technology do you use daily, or benefit from professionally, or trust without examining, whose largest possible negative consequence you have not yet seriously thought through? Not abstractly, specifically. Write it down. Think about it the way a physicist thinks about an equation, with rigor, without sentiment, willing to find an uncomfortable result. Then decide what, if anything, you are going to do about what you find. That is what I failed to do early enough. I do not think you are obligated to repeat my mistake.